It's real. It's real. You know the deal. You know the deal. Come on.
Hey, it's Shantae.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to What's the Deal, a podcast powered by The Norfus Firm. At The Norfus Firm, we solve people problems, and we have the great pleasure of working with employers all around the world on HR and DEI. We clown every time we come on camera, like beforehand. Because I always look at you. I need to not, because like you know those memes where they're like, don't put us next to each other if it's supposed to be serious. Because I look at you, and then it's like as soon as you start laughing your way through your name, then I do the same. Anyway, we're here.
We have fun. You gotta have fun.
We do have fun. That's the point. Sort of.
I personally think that you should have fun at work in at least some way, shape, or form.
Oh, same. I mean, it's where you spend most of the time.
Exactly. So
if you come in there miserable every day, what's the point? Yeah.
Do something else.
Please. All right. Well, we've been talking about beef at work, AKA workplace conflict. Mm-hmm. We've framed up how you can identify if your workplace is fertile ground for conflict.
Yep.
So what does it look like to do a workplace culture assessment? Are you ready? Why are you doing it? Are you communicating about it? What is your workplace culture? Mm-hmm. Which continues to be, I think, a mystery. Elusive. For most places we deal with. And then we've given some examples of like the types of conflicts that pop up. Political conflict, people feeling like a conflict's about race when it might be about personality or any other demographic. Leaders who are having conflict with each other.
Yep.
All right. So now it's like, well, what happens when we've identified a workplace conflict? Sure. How do we solve it?
Yeah, well, there are many ways to solve it. But this way that we're going to talk about today revolves around like conflict facilitation. Mm-hmm. So it's really focusing on the interpersonal relationships that are damaged or broken, and how do we mend those through facilitation. So bringing someone in or having a third party in the organization come in and facilitate something between people or groups.
Yes. And I think one of the reasons why we're so keyed into the fact that workplace conflict is on the rise is the number of calls we've gotten lately to do workplace culture facilitation. Workplace conflict facilitation. I will just put out there, for those of us who've been around a long time, we also call these mediations at work. We call them workplace conflict facilitations.
Because we're fancy.
And I think they're descriptive of what we're doing.
And I think, right.
We are fancy though.
Because mediation is a very like, was it a question? Was your eye?
It was just a confirmation. Oh, okay. It was like,
right?
Yeah.
Right. I think the mediation is a very specific thing and has like a
adversarial tone.
Yeah. Kind of like a lawyerly formal kind of feel to it. And we're not saying that workplace conflict facilitation isn't formal, but I think just the intent behind it is slightly different.
Yeah, because facilitation gets at the point of we're trying to help you find a way to resolve it. Mediation is almost like, all right, guys, break it up.
You go to your corner. You go to your corner.
What? All right, you know. And again, there's space for all of it, but like I said, I like the way we describe it just because it's a lot more descriptive of what we're getting at. Mm-hmm. So what is workplace conflict facilitation anyway?
Well, it's really about, understanding what's happening between people or within a group. Again, getting to the root of that. And then airing it out, like labeling, airing it out, letting, what is this, what's happening, who plays what role in this, and then how do we move forward?
Yep.
In what way can we move forward? And then because we're both trauma informed, we add that additional lens to it, which really focuses on, so how do we acknowledge the hurt, the past hurt? But it's, again, fostering more of like the healing aspect of it, the reconciliation aspect of it, but prioritizing just creating a space for it so that we don't re-traumatize, and approaching it in a way that doesn't trigger people in a way that ends up being unproductive.
And that re-traumatize piece is important. If you listened to our workplace culture assessment episode, we talk about this whole idea of don't play in people's faces, which gets at don't ask people lots of questions you're not going to do anything about. Well, if you add one more layer to that, having someone to have to repeat their story over and over is a way to re-traumatize and a way to trigger. Yeah. And so we try to be very careful about that. And we'll get into the process in a bit. But the sort of core of what we're saying is when you're holding space for people, like be thoughtful of the person. Nobody really wants to keep repeating why they have a conflict with someone. Right. You might do that when you're venting with people, but like at work, there becomes a point at which, I mean, I had this happen recently with a vendor we were using where the relationship was not working out. And I had set out in an email sort of where our challenges were. When I got on the phone with someone to talk about what the issue was, I said, look, this partnership just really doesn't work for us anymore. I'm happy to share with you why, but I just want to be clear, like we need to move forward. And it took like 4 weeks of me saying very explicitly, hey, this is not working for us. And them still coming back, well, you're right. You do deserve a new account rep. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I said no. I really said no, very clearly no. And so then by the time we get on another call, I am beside myself because I've repeated myself multiple times. And I'm like, you're not listening to me. Right. And that's where a lot of these conflicts arise, is that people are like, you're not hearing me. Right. We don't have to agree. Right. But at least acknowledge that you hear what I'm saying, because if you're not even saying, hey, Shantae, I hear you, and here's my view on it, then it's like you're skipping a whole huge step, and that's what causes conflict, right? You're just discarding the person, and you want them to agree or do something, and it's like, so that feeling of that what it can do is it just builds all this like angriness in your heart of like, yo, I'm ready to fight. Yeah. Like I said no, I said I'm done. I said I don't want to do this. Right. And then when we finally get on the call with the last person, I'm like, we've broken up with you, but you haven't broken up with us yet. Like, I don't really know what else to say. Like,
just hold it on.
Exactly. So it's important to understand like that when people have reached a point where there's something that has broken about a relationship with someone they work with, the care you take with solving it is at that point more important than the conflict itself. Because if you're not taking the care in how you solve it, it's just going to proliferate.
It's going to make it worse.
Yeah.
That care is really, really important. Because again, coming back to the trauma piece, majority, if not, I don't know of anyone who hasn't had a traumatic experience in their life.
Everybody has.
And so those things make us who we are. And so you're coming into this work environment and something happens within a group or between people, and something comes up, you get charged, you get triggered, you get activated. There's a different words to all mean the same thing. Yeah. And now all of a sudden communication breaks down and productivity is out the door. And so it's really important to take that care to really allow people to be able to, okay, let's really hold space for people to talk about what's going on with them, because and what happened in that whatever interaction that was, so that we can move it forward.
Yeah. And so I think this is also important to keep in mind. Just because you bring in a facilitator to work on this issue, that is not necessarily going to solve the problem. Again, I didn't see your face, but I can see your face. I didn't see your face, but I can see your face in my mind. Yes. In my mind, I can see what you're thinking.
People are annoying.
Because it's always some kind of shortcut you're trying to take. Listen, 2 people at work, 3 people, we have one where 5 people are not getting along. That is typically a symptom of something much larger than the particular conflict that we're coming in to deal with. Yep. And so if you think, hey, we're going to solve all these problems by getting these folks in a room and getting them to talk about it, you are a fool. Because it is not that straightforward. No. If you're not getting to the root, so with the way we do the process, which we'll get into in one second, we do try to get at the root, right? What process broke down? What expectation was not clear? What policy is not in place that maybe needs to be in place? Right. Was there something inequitable about what happened? Right. Because it's oftentimes, if you think about some of the things, like putting aside, like if you look at the politics, maybe we don't agree on something outside of work. But when you look at it at work, it's over and over and over, people get disagreeing about how something's supposed to be done.
Right.
It is over and over and over. Oh, this is the process, but they go and they do it that other way. And we're supposed to be collaborating. And it's like, but it always starts off from who's right about the approach to the work or what's supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to point that out of like, you still have to deal with the bigger issue of what led to the conflict, which may be outside of just the personality clashing. Mm-hmm. Because the personalities clash because they've already clashed about work. Right. Right. Like I'm doing an investigation where they're supposed to be, they're supposed to use these boards. It's a manufacturing environment. So they're supposed to like update the boards regularly with how close are they to the daily goal. So like every couple hours, like how many things have been completed and how many are left. And one of the people who complained wasn't doing it regularly. And so she was complaining about being put on a performance improvement plan. And like, I'm listening to her and she's like, and I wasn't trained and I didn't know how to do it. And it's like, right. So then everything else her boss is going to say to her is going to upset her because she already feels like she doesn't understand the baseline thing or the process wasn't clear or someone didn't show her how to do it. So then it's like whatever he says to her is going to agitate her because it's like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing here.
It's this, underneath that is this idea that I'm less than or I'm not. Right. And so anything to your point that the boss says is just
digging,
confirming.
She kept saying that.
Confirming that's what it is.
When we check in on this PIP, he don't have nothing. I'm not doing nothing right. He keeps saying I'm not doing it. And then it's how she's starting to view herself.
It's the story, it's the narrative, right? And that you get in that swirl. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So step 1 to a workplace conflict facilitation.
Well, let's see. First, it's talking to the people to give them the space to share their story and what it is. And then really understanding, are you even interested in this? You got to get buy-in. You really got to you can't force this on people.
Well, so the first thing on the what's going on, I think it gets back to like being careful about not re-triggering people. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we're working in situations where like investigations have been done and there's written statements or other statements from people. So if we have statements and we have some idea of what their concerns are, we won't go in and ask you to re-explain it from the beginning, right? Just to be clear on when we're saying don't re-traumatize people. I'm not going to ask you to repeat something if the words on the page are clear to me. I'm going to come in having read those words on the page so I can demonstrate some level of understanding of where you are with things. So that way we can go a little bit deeper on, what came up for you because of these issues.
I think to that point, what we apply is a lot of curiosity. So if, we see something and we're like, I wonder what's going on there. We bring that to the conversation with the person. Again, a lot of acknowledgement, a lot of validating, but then that curiosity to let them know, okay, we see you, we hear you, and what's really going on here? Because what that gets at is we as facilitators have to do a really great job of getting to establish trust early.
Quick.
Or it has to happen very quickly. And we have to do that by curiosity and active listening are the tools that we would use there in order for people to really want to go a little bit deeper. Because again, we can read the words on the pages, right? But it's you got to get into the depth of it and really get into the emotions that trigger the thoughts, that trigger the actions, right? Like those things, or the thoughts that trigger the emotions that trigger the actions in order to really understand how did we even end up here?
And the reason why that's so important outside of centering the human and making sure that they feel well with the process is a lot of times, I would say 90% of the time, someone, whoever our contact is, whether it's the HR person or an executive or whoever, they tell us what they think the problem is. And if you only listen to that and trying to you will get caught because then you'll be trying to rationalize everything someone's saying into the first person to tell you.
Right.
I'm starting to fight the mic again, but hug it. This time I'm trying to hug it. I get hype and I get really wild with the mic, y'all who can't see me. I'm like, if you see my arms are like wrapping around, it's wild. But the thing is that like, that's also why we try to come in very unbiased. Mm-hmm. Even when I'm thinking about this from an investigation standpoint, because some of the starting points are similar, when people are trying to explain me the problem, I'll often very gently ask them, hey, you know what? I can learn that through the process, because I don't ever want someone's view of what the problem is to cloud our judgment on how we approach, whether it be investigation or facilitation. Mm-hmm. But that curiosity is like, oh, okay.
Right.
I mean, like then there's people involved that you didn't know were involved, or the person talking to you. There's all kinds of things that are usually like, oh, there's a whole lot more here than meets the eye. Mm-hmm. And also, I would love for you to get a little bit deeper on what I'm calling consent, that people you're also called buy-in to participate in the process. But we always say we want to have everyone's consent to do a facilitation.
It's because it's an emotional process and it's hard. And sometimes people just don't want to go through that. Again, if we're talking about coming at it from a trauma-informed perspective, I don't want to do it. I don't want to have to hash this out again and again. They may feel like it hasn't worked. So why would it work? Like a couple things could be influencing why they don't want to do it. It doesn't matter. If they say no, they say no. But we try to create a space where people would want to at least, talk about it and consider it and move it forward. But again, it's important to have that because you want someone to be willing coming into this process in order to really be able to clear up whatever has come up so that there is some sort of reconciliation or you can move it forward. Because if they're resistant to it,
they're going to sit there like this, arms crossed. Their body language is going to tell you how much they don't want to be there.
Yeah.
They'll give you one-word answers. No answers.
And what gets resolved at that point? Nothing really.
No. Yeah. And it's brutal. It's very uncomfortable.
For everybody.
It's not an uncomfortable that does anything. It's just uncomfortable.
Right.
So what if someone says, I hear just what you said, I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of this person. I don't want to do this. I'm not doing it. Then what?
Okay, I hear you. Fair, right? That's totally valid. Understanding that though, we do need to create a space where you all can work together. So then what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you actually, what would work here to make this workable? Right. So that everybody can do something. And so maybe getting more into, the solutioning around that if they are not interested in actually unpacking it and getting to the root of this with the person or the group, whatever it is. But we're at work. We're at work and we need to figure out how to do the work. So I don't have that energy with them, obviously, because it would definitely not go anywhere. But let's be real about it. We're at work, so we need to create a workable environment. So, but asking them, so what are your thoughts on how to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I will say, fortunately, most of the time people are willing to do the process, but we have had people who are like, no, I'm done. I don't want to do it. And so from that standpoint, then to Shantae's point, we try to dig to understand, are there some things we can at least agree to on working together, and do the same thing with whoever else is involved, but not bring the parties together. So if someone is not interested in doing a facilitation, we are not going to put them together. No. That's just silly. Now, so just to be clear there, you can still solve the problem. It just may not be that the problem is being solved by the folks talking to each other and unpacking, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. What about when they agree? So we've gotten curious and understand what some of the issues are. We've gotten their consent or buy-in to participate. Yep. And then what?
So we've talked to them individually, and then we connect with one another to talk about if we're co-facilitating, then we try to get a baseline of what are the issues that we're dealing with here. And then we normally go into the facilitation where we schedule it and start the conversation there. Whenever we get to that part of the process, we are always very clear about what the guidelines are, the community agreements, how are we going to engage with one another in this conversation so that everyone feels seen and heard. And just what are the rules of engagement, basically, but in a way that, again, affirms the people mm-hmm. and really sees them as people and really wants to, call people in instead of calling people out. So just really making sure we create the proper container with these agreements first and foremost.
Gosh, you brought up a lot of good stuff there. So we typically co-facilitate. And the reason why we co-facilitate is to help make sure we're avoiding any kind of bias. Mm-hmm. Shantae and I have very different approaches to facilitation, coaching, and the like. And shorthand is, while you may not see today, Shantae's much more patient, and she's much more
on good days.
Yeah. And I'm a lot more direct, and still we hold space in ways where both of us get folks who give us lots and lots of information. We get people who always want to talk to us, but we approach it differently. And because of that, it's helpful for us to be able to come back and make sure not our perspective is not dominating over what's most important is what are the employees telling us? Yeah. So it helps for us to co-facilitate, to kind of be able to check each other or bounce things off of each other so that we're staying as neutral as possible throughout the process. The other thing you brought up that I think is important is around the rules of engagement. Mm-hmm. And it brings up for me, like, well, why would you even hire a third party to do it? Why wouldn't you just get the manager of these people to do it? Or why wouldn't you just get someone from HR to do it? Both of which are possibilities.
Yeah, it's possible.
But what are the reasons why you would even bring in an external third party to facilitate?
That neutrality is a big one. It's huge because the bias thing. You don't want someone who may already have a bias or may already have a narrative in their head around who's right and who's wrong. And, and the trust thing. If you're the manager and this is broken down, I'm sure this is the first time you heard about this. Let's be real. You probably, this is bubbled up, whatever this thing is bubbled up before, and somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do and nip it in the bud. Right. So, okay. So they already don't trust this. If you're coming in here, they already don't trust it because they're like, well, you didn't do anything when you were supposed to in the first place when I brought it to you. So having a third party come in just helps to say, okay, no, we're taking this seriously. We really want to get it done and move it forward. And so we're showing a commitment by providing a resource to do this the right way.
And look, if the conflict is charged enough, you need to have some skill set. You need to have been trained to deal with it, which is what we are trained to do. Sometimes the conflict is too far gone for a manager or an HR person to try to mediate or help, bring some closure. So I think that just points out that conflicts, like a lot of things, live on a spectrum. And there's some disagreements that you can resolve like pretty straightforwardly in-house. And sometimes it's just like, what's the proper process? Mm-hmm. And sometimes things, because they festered for so long, require something different. And along those lines, it was like NIH had a group who did a survey. And of the folks they surveyed, over 60% noted that on some level, that the workplace conflict doesn't get resolved. Right. 11% saying it's always unresolved. 30% were like, it's sometimes unresolved. And then the rest were like, something a little bit less than that. And so the reality is that, to your point, it's typically not the first time you're hearing about this particular thing. I mean, all the time we go in and we're like, yeah, they've been going back and forth about this and it's like, y'all just sitting there watching this happen. And so then now you're wondering why they're like this. And then you want to rush us to solve the conflict, which is not really how that's always what happens. People come to us when it's just we need you to talk to everybody right now. And it's like, that's not how this works. It's not how this works.
And it's also not a magic bullet. Like, you're not going to just automatically, solve it with this thing. It doesn't work because trust takes time. And honestly, this process is ushering that. Like, it's trying to get folks to rebuild trust with one another. And this is just the start. There's a lot more work that has to happen after the conflict facilitation.
Yeah, because we are coming in for 1 to 3 sessions between the people. And the reason why we always say 1 to 3 is because if it goes beyond 3, you have a bigger issue than this conflict, right? Mm-hmm. Because our goal is to help quell the charge around the conflict, help make sure people feel heard. So when we are doing the facilitation itself, we repeat the issues so that people aren't triggered by hearing the person they have the problem with repeat the issues, right? We're thoughtful of all that, but it's really to have a solve for a very specific issue. It's not a solve forever because they have to do the things that we agree to do, right? So that's the point at the end of this facilitation is, what are we agreeing to do differently going forward? You have to practice that. Yeah. And the trust comes from people holding up their ends of the bargain.
Correct.
And that's not something that happens in 1 to 3 sessions.
Behavior changes. Yeah. Hard.
Yeah. We've also, I will just throw in, started using Cloverleaf, which we've talked about before. And Cloverleaf is an online coaching tool that takes various assessments that we all know and love, DISC, 16 types, Enneagram, puts them all together, gives you a profile of a person, and it also shows what causes conflict between people. And so we like to use as many insights as possible before we talk to people so that we're not just coming across as like clinicians, like excavating.
Yeah.
You know, we're coming in understanding certain aspects of it.
Comes back to the care.
Right. All right. So, and then the last thing that we didn't say is that we also just report back to whoever hired us some recommendations on what might also be causing conflict and how to assess it or deal with it going forward. Again, conflict facilitation is not a magic bullet, to use Shantae's term. It is something to help with a very specific sort of conflict. And it's something that in the end, you have to practice over and over. So quick recap. Number one, taking it back. Do you know what your workplace culture is? Do you know if it's ripe or fertile ground for conflict? Is conflict coming up? I'm using my fingers, but I'm not counting because I don't know how to count. You know, do you understand that if a conflict has arisen, is it one that can be resolved within the team by a manager or an HR person, or has the conflict arisen to a point where you need a third party who's got the expertise in dealing with that type of conflict or conflict that's elevated? We get curious about what's going on. So what are all the things we can learn about the conflict before we actually talk to the people involved? Talking to those people, being curious about where they stand, getting their consent or their buy-in to participate in the facilitated process. If they don't want to do that, then understanding what things that they think would help solve it, or at least allow them to work with the other person and help solve the conflict that way. If they say yes, we bring everybody together. We do community agreements, so we are very clear about how the process is going to work so that no one gets harmed during the process. Work through what they can do to work together going forward. Tell them they have to do it.
Keep doing it.
Right?
Yep.
Got to practice it. And then we, the facilitators, report back on any signs of further conflict or ways in which you can help prevent this in the future.
Yes.
We'll be back. We will. We appreciate you. We hope you listen to this whole Beef at Work series because it's very informative. And Beef at Work is workplace
conflict
for shared language purposes. Find us all the places.
Oh, it's my turn.
Yeah.
TheNorfusFirm.com.
I'm just seeing if she knows today.
Let's see. What's the deal? We are on TikTok and Instagram. Yep. Norfus Firm is on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. Yeah, I think that's all of it, right?
Yeah, YouTube also.
YouTube.
Yeah.
See, I knew I was going to miss one. This is why I'm not good at this part. It's okay.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Here it is. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership. That's the deal when you know what you're dealing with.